So I'm Tom Dakich. We met earlier today. And you met Scott earlier today. Dave, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Dave Pavlik. I'm a aspiring comedian. I'm also a rapper and do home repair. I'm the managing partner of Decennial Group.
And not very good at comedy and not very good at home repair.
That is true. And marginally okay at private equity investment.
So is Amy still here? Amy? So Amy said, I think, the smartest thing anybody said today on the whole stage, which was, don't go where you're not invited. If you're going to go into an urban area, don't act like you're Lord God, King of the universe, and come in and kind of trample people. And one of the things you heard from Scott earlier today was exactly that sentiment, making the investment or making the community supplemented and making it better, not changing it the way that you want it to look at. So we're going to start with Scott about kind of filling the gap on that.
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about this Brownsville Lakefront project we're doing in Chicago, and I just think the background story of it is kind of pertinent. The land, as I mentioned, was supposed to be the Olympic site that the Chicago didn't get, and as a result, the city wound up with these more than 50 acres of land, and they put out an RFP, and we submitted a response to it. But before we did that, we put together a team that we named GRIT, which is the Global Research, Innovation, and Tourism Team. Really what it stood for is Get Ready, It's Time, which is how we feel about investing on the south side of Chicago in 2022 and 23. The most important thing about that team is our company's Farpoint got to lead it, but really our team was diverse both in how we looked and in our skill sets. So we have the largest African-American-owned investment bank in the country, Chicago-based Thru Capital. We have Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, which is a local not-for-profit developer. We have a couple other, a local CDC, another African-American-led development team. So we were very diverse in going in, and once we were awarded the RFP, we literally spent 5 years negotiating with the community, engaging the community, engaging the aldermen, engaging City Hall, and engaging the planning department to make sure what we were doing was not done in a vacuum. You know, and as a result of those discussions, negotiations, and just listening to the community wants, it kind of dictated a little bit of the order that we are doing things. So we are doing a health innovation life science building first, followed very closely by, actually that building will include a community center, which is being designed by the community at large. The second building we build will be a age-restricted building, which again was directly impacted by the community desires. And then we made a lot of commitments to things like MBE and WBE businesses. So we promised 30% MBE and 10% WBE, but we are endeavoring to do 65% minority participation, which is difficult and never been on the city before, but we're committed to that. I mentioned the community center that we're giving $10 million to. We're giving $20 million to Chicago Public Schools. We are creating intern and apprenticeship programs, working with the unions in Chicago to create job opportunities and job training. And then we're subsidizing some of the retail so that local businesses get a 20% discount on 10% of the spaces. So heavily engaged with the community. It's for that reason, actually, that we were really at the stage we are today, where we are fully entitled and with our plan development, and then we have our redevelopment agreement all agreed to with the city, which from a developer standpoint, you know, really de-risks a large part of the deal. So we're really proud of that, and we think it's a really important part of urban development. So I just wanted to tell that story a little bit, and the amount of effort and hours and days, and you know, it's funny. I can tell you, I just golfed with the alderman last week, and this is a woman that I had to, after a community meeting at 10:30 at night, I had to go to her. I knocked on her door at 11 o'clock at night after walking, 3/4 of a mile from this meeting that was extremely contentious. Sat there for an hour kind of arguing it out, said I'll come back the next day, which was Saturday. Was there all day Saturday. I was leaving for Utah the next day. We decided that there was a meeting. I literally was in Utah at a hotel at 8 in the morning on the phone, got in the car, got to the airport, went through security, got on the airplane, got in the car on the way home, and got home and was still on the same phone call. So the fact that we're still talking is pretty good. So we're pretty proud of that.
So Scott is, and if anybody here gets to grow their relationship with Scott, one of the first things you'll learn is he's one of the most modest, self-effacing people you'll meet. So when he says 65% commitment for this project, I think it's proper to frame that in terms of dollars. How many dollars of MBWB participation would that mean if you're able to hit your 65% goal?
65% of $4 billion.
So $2.4 billion of economic activity for what are generally disenfranchised, marginalized participants in these markets.
And I meant to say this at the start. If anybody has any questions, just raise your hand, because this is kind of heady stuff. And so please don't hesitate to ask any questions as we're going along. One of the things about Bronzeville and about your whole attitude has been the urban reinvention, urban revitalization, bringing things that aren't indigenous to the neighborhood. And Dave, you at Decennial have been doing that. Data centers, urban farming. Do you want to talk about how you're working, how you at Decennial are working, or maybe describe who Decennial is first, and then talk about how that's augmenting Scott's vision with Farpoint.
Sure. Yeah. So let me start with this, because Scott actually mentioned it on the way up here. Is I'm wearing a ball cap right now. It's the same one I was wearing yesterday, if anybody saw me. I played hockey for a long time, and anybody who knows hockey players, which I imagine around here there's affinity for it, tremendously superstitious. And so this hat says Paddy O'Shea's, which is in Ireland, and we are at best and final hours, hopefully, away from hearing if we've successfully secured a site for a data center campus in Ireland, which will be the first one of a rollout of what we believe is a transformative approach to what we call energy-intensive campuses. So Decennial Group, so that's why I'm wearing this cap. I'm not one of those people. Well, I am, but not because of that. So Decennial Group, everybody says, what do you do? And they go into whatever their spiel is. I find multifamilies that have odd numbers of floors, and I change the color paint, and then I do this and I do that, and then there's money or whatever it is. And when we formed Decennial, and Scott is a founding partner of Decennial as well. When we formed Decennial, we took a really different approach, which was to identify and solve really meaningful challenges. So when people ask me, what do you do at Decennial? Our answer is we solve meaningful challenges. And for this decade, we believe the meaningful challenge and some of the subsets of that are sitting at the nexus of data, energy, and infrastructure for real assets. So the name Decennial is because that is how we think. We think in decades for our investors, for the communities that we are fortunate enough to operate, and then ultimately for our investments and our business. So this decade, it's solving meaningful challenges at the center of data, energy, and infrastructure.
And some of that involves data center and also involves urban farming.
Correct. Yep. And if you close your eyes and think about that, that just seems like a group of people that threw something against the wall and kept what stuck, right? What do data centers and urban farms have in common? And it is that they exactly sit at the center of tremendous data center needs, intense energy usage needs, and really, really complicated infrastructure for real assets. So for us, while the widget that comes out of them for data centers, it's TikTok videos and spreadsheets, and for urban farming, it's mint and basil, those are widgets to us, right? That's an operating team that comes in and does something. within Decennial Group, in solving that meaningful challenge, what we realized is if you want to think long term and execute across that horizon, you need to solve what we believe is a fundamental gap or deficiency in private equity today, private equity allocation specifically. It hasn't reared its ugly head because we've had 14 years of organic and partially artificial good times, right? It's been arguably 08, 09 since anybody's really had to show that their business model can hold up in extreme duress and distress. We had a flash crash in 2020, but before it was even realized as a crash, government had stepped in and said, hey, we're going to solve this for you. Moratoriums on rent, checks at home, and all of that stuff was needed. But no one really in the community of investment and operating businesses had to contend with, oh shit, what do I do now when I don't have zombie capital, when customers aren't throwing money at me, and all of the things that go along with it. So for us, to solve those meaningful challenges on a long-term horizon, we realized very quickly that we needed to do two things. We needed to integrate our business. So Decennial Group has an investment management group, a development management group, and a strategic tactical operations group. So we can take source capital from investors, and then we deploy it into deals where we are at the very least the co-manager, general partner, sponsor of the deal, but more often than not, we're the sole general partner of the deal. And we only do this in industries where we see a gap in performance. So for data centers, we realize they don't tackle energy the right way because they've always counted on energy being there, and we know that's not going to be the case. In some cases, it's not anymore even already. In urban farming, we realized no one was wrapping the whole thing together for the users of these urban farms. And so that's our strategical tactical ops group. And when we run our game of Plinko, it's can we be better than the average bear deploying capital using things like PACE financing, you learned about that earlier, or qualified opportunity zones, or Section 48 energy intensive or energy investment tax credits. So can we deploy capital better than the average bear? Are we competent, and can we be a world-class developer of those assets to give our investors certainty of execution? And is there something broken in the model where it's worth going in there and doing it so that we can get the extra customers? What's the strategic tactical operating function that pulls it all together for us? So that integrated approach is one. And then we turn cost centers into profit centers. We all firmly believe that private equity is broken. Somebody handing a check over to somebody, and not to pick on whoever's a 29-year-old punk in this room, but a 29-year-old punk who's never been on the operating side of any of these businesses, who graduated whatever cum laude at some amazing university, no real-world experience, got some grooming from a managing director, is making bets or picking trades on this stuff. And when the shit hits the fan, that private equity firm has no real ability to correct those defaults. They have legal remedies. They might be able to recoup some of this. There might be collateral that they can repossess, but they can't fix the broken problem in any sort of real-time way. So for us, with that breakage, we decided the cost of profit center should start with things like fund management. So we said we'll dedicate all of our AUM needs between deployed and committed capital. We're right under $1 billion of AUM today. Why pay a fund manager to do that? Let's take our need, put it toward a fund management business, and then brand that business, have it take us as case studies, and go out into the market with third parties and do it for them as well. Profit from that now turns the cost center of fund management and fund administration for us into an actual profit center. The second one for us is capital markets. So we invested in and now own a large minority of a registered broker-dealer so that we don't pay the 1 or 2% in capital markets fees. We pay it, but we pay it into a business that, again, has third-party customers who then create profit. What that does for us at the end of all of this long, winding road I just walked you through is it gives us the ability to work with our investors, who we really treat as partners, and come up with bespoke investment solutions for them. So much of what we do on our platform within urban farming, within data centers, is actually some series of separately managed account or joint venture activity that gives the 95% solution for our investment manager or for our investors instead of the, hey, we built this cold mingle fund, here's the terms, take it or leave it. We don't think that's interesting. We don't think that builds long-lasting partnerships. And it brings it all back to, did you do better than your peers in whatever this class is, and do I have enough money to be in your second fund? Not interesting to us.
So, I took a lot of notes. To go back to the start of this, Bronzeville is going to take a lot of energy. Dave talked about basically energy management and basically turning it into a profit center as opposed to a cost. Have you been able to kind of marry these two ideas?
Yeah, we're trying really hard right now. So we are currently working on the very first stages of our horizontal infrastructure, which is basically we need to create an entire street grid and the right-of-ways. And as part of that, we'll be putting in a microgrid, which will be a self-sustained energy district, right? And through that, we hope to source a high proportion of renewable power that goes with that. Decennial, and well, it's really what Dave is not saying too, who's way more modest than I am. He really comes from an energy background, which is 11 million acres is his company, which you should talk about also. But we're working together to come up with the optimal microgrid for our site. The other thing that our site has is just like the railroads, all fiber kind of meets in Chicago. Really, and our site is kind of ground zero for that. So we'll be doing a data center there as well, and also creating a smart grid. So it'll be very forward-looking in both data and in energy. But you should talk a little bit more about that.
So energy management and energy creation is what 11 million acres does.
Yeah, I think you're starting to see the very beginnings of a systemic breakdown on behalf of units of government and a responsibility that they promised constituents across the world, but especially in the United States, right? Everybody operated under this idea that transportation, starting with the Eisenhower Expressway in the 50s, was going to get solved by government. Clean water was going to get solved by government. Look at Jackson. It started in Flint, which we still don't have a solution for. You're seeing it here. But go down to Jackson now, right? Jackson, Mississippi, people were boiling water because it was coming out brown. The funding mechanisms and everything involved in that were not prepared for when all of this stuff aged at the same time and cost 40 to 75 times more than it did when they put it in the first place, right? So it's going to be the responsibility of mega developers like Scott, who are taking on entire neighborhoods and communities, to solve for all of those challenges. The reality is that presents a tremendous opportunity, and energy is one of those. But energy, communication, and transportation, logistics of goods and people are all right in this nascent kind of fledgling infancy stage of being able to do awesome things, create revenue centers for the development, for the community. And it's going to be the ones that embrace that and lean into that and build their flexibility. To take those abstracts and give you examples, if you make your own power on one of these mega sites, here are the benefits you get against just buying it from the utility company. If you let the utility wheel up their power, they make the expenditure. They do it inefficiently because most of them don't really have to count on capital efficiency. They make the investment and they charge you 10% of whatever that investment was a year plus principal repayment for 30 years, right? They get a 10% return on cost. So you get the power from them. It's more expensive because it's got all these layered in fees, plus those groups have to make a profit, right? Instead, if you do it on your own, you get all the depreciation benefits, which are unbelievably lucrative for energy. Most of this stuff you can 100% depreciate the year you put it into service. 2, you could be way more capital efficient about it. And 3, now it becomes an economic lever when negotiating with tenancy, right? What do tenants care about? How much am I paying per square foot? How much am I paying in energy? How much am I paying in ancillary fees that get tagged to whatever this stuff is? Add them all up, get to total cost of ownership or leasing, and then that's where they're at. Well, if you control your destiny on energy, that's a lever in there. You've got somebody that's super price sensitive on square footage. Great. Charge them less in square footage and more commensurate to market for energy. They don't care about that and they want to see dirt cheap energy because it fits in their model better. Lower that and raise square footage. Other things, though, are augmented reality. Everybody's heard about the metaverse. Everybody's heard about who's going to do it. Is it Apple? Is it Facebook? VR, Oculus was the gift of the year in 2022 or 2021 for Christmas holiday season. Who, when they're planning their developments, even in a vertical, but take a campus, are thinking about the infrastructure for a world of augmented reality, where your prescription glasses or a pair of aftermarket glasses let you see everything about a facility and the people that are in that facility. You're going to have a public profile that you're going to decide, do I want to put out there my profession? Yeah, I want people to know I'm an investment banker or a... Do I want to let them know if I'm single and what my persuasion or sexual preference might be? That I'm a parent, that the 3 most important issues to me are choice and guns and whatever. All of that's going to be in a dossier that people are going to be able to see with their glasses if you want them to see it. Fire. Take facilities now. We hear about active shooters at least twice a month. It's terrible. Imagine a scenario where every one of those students in a school, through their glasses, could be a bird's eye view for the SWAT team or whoever the emergency responders are. And they could see a digitally stitched version of every square footage in that facility because the glasses were transmitting effectively the augmented reality for everybody that was out there. Take one that's less tragic. There's a fire or a fire alarm gets pulled. Who right now can tell me what the ingress egress for an emergency exit in this building is? If you do, I got $50 for it because you're the most detail-oriented person in here. But there's a sign somewhere here where if you find it, it's got a goofball little red like arrow, go here, do a flip, and you're out the door. With augmented reality, boom, blinking red arrows from wherever you are point you to the exit. Not only the static exits, but the ones that aren't where the fire is or where the emergency is, right? That's an example. Developers are going to build that in. So when you think of energy, don't just think of electrons. Think of it really as infrastructure. And it's energy, it's data communication, and it's going to be transportation logistics, right? Who's got an Amazon hub in there where they live or at the grocery store or where they shop? Raise your hand. Okay. Before the end of that decade, the number will be 100%. Guarantee you. Right now, for example, how does it get there? A truck pulls up at some hour, blocks your side street, pisses everybody off. Gals running in there with a bunch of boxes, pissing in some water bottle because he's on some timer, right? Why is that not going to be a drone that pulls up to the top of your building? The elevator stack that's got to go to the top anyway has a dumbwaiter hatch on it, drops that stuff in, gets let off on every floor, and right by the trash chute, if you're in a multi-family unit, is your little Amazon package. You're not suffering surface transportation in any way, shape, or form. Guys like Scott are thinking about that as part of their development because what does that do? It changes the entire composite of your development. If you don't need overhead electrical lines because you're betting on a year 2030 or 2035 where all the energy on your campus either comes subterraneously through major arteries of power or through batteries that are portable. Your phone is in your pocket and people aren't running out to phone banks out there, payphone banks, because of batteries. Batteries made for you to be able to look at your phones in here. Energy for buildings is going to be the same way. The Ford F-150 today has a dual wave battery. That F-150 Lightning can power a home in the event of power outage. That becomes part of these developments. So when you're thinking about investments or you're thinking about community transformation, if you're not hearing that sort of thought leadership, you're investing in a dinosaur. It just doesn't realize it's in the tar pits yet.
And government can either be in the way or be part of the solution. It just depends on how you manage them and how you bring them in as a partner. So P3s have been an important part of your development, the energy management, energy creation, but also your development on the south side.
Everything we do is P3, so it's it's what I said at the beginning. Everything we did was with government cooperation. A lot of we will be getting a lot of subsidy. We will be getting the city is giving us $60 million to do the initial stages of our infrastructure. So yes, everything we do is in consort. Although they don't think like Dave they think like I used to think before I met Dave, which is just kind of the way we've always done things, right? And the truth is, I will bet you a nickel that in 15 years, the neighborhood that we're creating will be the most appealing neighborhood in the city of Chicago to live, because we get to build from the bottom up and create all this infrastructure that you can't create anywhere else because the buildings are already built. You just can't get this level of data and fiber and power and everything else subterranean. You're playing catch up, and here we're starting from the beginning.
And being really close to both of you, Dave has been good for you because Dave's team has been able to bring those ideas to you, but you've also been good for Dave because you're giving him a proving ground for what you're doing.
Clearly mutually beneficial. Yep. Plus, he looks good in a hat. I look terrible.
And government, as you mentioned, Ireland, Illinois, Indiana. I mean, these places have really, the places that have supported you, the places that have adopted PACE, the places that have made land available, those sorts of things. And you've been able to go to and incorporate some of these ideas, at least start them.
Yeah, and it's back to you started it by announcing the smartest thing here was don't go in saying and spraying, go in listening, and that comes back to what we think is this fundamental break in traditional capital allocation is those allocators don't have the control mechanisms in place to be able to truly listen to this diverse set of constituents to do this sort of stuff and impact it. They're there to say, I will evaluate your plan like it's the science fair and decide which ones we think are the best. That's why they're able to put this shit on the internet that says, evaluate the leadership team first, evaluate that there's not too much debt, because it's so static, right? So you pick the things, the very small subset of things that you can control, which is place your dollars with good leadership teams or management teams with experience. To do this the right way, you got to be able to listen and then amend and create bespoke. If you're able to create bespoke on the development by bringing the community in, by bringing the regulators in, by bringing the city hall in, if you have the ability to make that bespoke, then you can make the investment solution with your investors bespoke, and that's how you create the win-win-wins that are, for the most part, much more insulated to recession issues, to downside, to lack of allocating or execution factor. All of that can be solved because you have continuity.
And I just want to mention, too, that the idea here is these are all really good investment decisions as well, right? So we are at a point in time where some of the things that may not have been financially feasible before, there's a lot of great incentives for us to do that, especially on the energy side. But we get to be both profitable and purposeful, and I think that's a really important. Everything sounds very dreamy here right now. Everything sounds like, wow, that's going to happen someday. No, it's today, and the incentives to do so today are in place, and we get to do them in a way that offers a great return to the investor, and then a good long-term investment for the entire project.
Let's stay with that one for a second. So we solve meaningful challenges, and one of the reasons for that is if there's a challenge, you're still early in the space. And if you're earlier in the space, there's a whole set of what we've dubbed as pioneer incentives. An easy example to crystallize that is LED lighting. Who's got LED lighting in their home today? Everybody. Did you get a rebate from it, or did you just go to the hardware store or probably your grocery store and buy it, right? 10 years ago, when you were marketing a property, if you were a multifamily developer and wanted to rent apartments, what did you do at the top? You put new LED lighting, right? And those came with massive rebates from the utility company. That's an example of a pioneer's incentive. You got in early, there was a challenge, the challenge was embraced in a smart way, and you got some money. But for developers that are willing to do it, listen to their constituents, those pioneer incentives can be super, super creative. Our campus in Hammond, thanks to the leadership of Tom here, has all sorts of pioneer incentives that the data centers right across this imaginary line between Indiana and Illinois don't have. We have sales tax abatements. We have an opportunity zone. The list goes on and on that are baked in there because Tom listened to his constituency in City Hall and in the governor's office, heard what they would love to see out of a mega development right on the border, and had the flexibility, because he had the management responsibility, to incorporate most, if not all of that, which they then rewarded with a set of incentives. That sort of stuff is available when you integrate everything into it.
And dovetailing off that, we talked about PACE earlier. We talked about qualified opportunity zones earlier, and those are two incentives that have really worked. And those are working to supercharge, or maybe they don't supercharge, but maybe they create enough margin for an investor for the investment to make sense. Opportunity zones were mentioned briefly here today. Dave and Scott, as you remember, gave us a little bit of an overview. Why don't you talk about how it works from your perspective?
Yeah, we think opportunity zones are phenomenal tools. Like any policy-driven program or opportunity, there's always constraints and challenges and what any one of us might think is some deficiency to it. But all in all, qualified opportunity zones, we believe, selfishly, are a really great tool because they started the investor class thinking out of the quarterly or 2-year time horizon that so many investors were migrating to, right? It forced them to think in 10-year cycles, which, if you're smart about it, can be a phenomenal opportunity. I'm going to give one example, and then I'm going to hand it to Scott. But has anybody paid attention to what Sequoia's done in like the last 9 months? They made an announcement. They kind of did it under their breath. Is anybody familiar with Sequoia's Forever Fund and what they're promising? So they realized, taking money from the sovereigns, from the pensions, from the endowments, that came with these arbitrary timelines of 5 years and you're out, right? Completely arbitrary. Okay, we all agreed to this 5-year thing here, but we didn't plan for a once in a generation recession or a bubble in whatever that industry is or whatever it may be. Nobody planned for that, but now you got to return the capital, and all of that hard work out the window because of just some shitty artificial timing of some agreements that you set up in the front end, and everybody built off of a flawed agreement, right? Well, Sequoia realized, after making nearly seed investments in companies like Twitter, like now Block, but Square, that they were making investments at a $50 million valuation, Square, $50 million, that they had to exit at year 6 when it was worth, I want to say at the time it was worth like $2 billion or $2.5 billion. Square today is a $125 billion market cap business. They had to exit because they had to return capital when both parties had already agreed, man, we'd love to stay in this deal. So Sequoia created this Forever Fund, which really we like to say we were doing it like 3 years before. It was saying, we're not going to, our timing is 10 years-ish. We give ourselves a couple of 2 years extensions. We're going to do what's right for the investment and right for the community, because we're not going to abandon them to get you your bag of cash if they're right at this turning point. Now you're seeing the Sequoias doing it. You're going to see more and more of it as the family offices get more sophisticated, and they just bypass the kind of omnibus investment bank. So, yeah, I mean, opportunity zones are a tremendous tool, great tax benefits, and they force folks into thinking long term, which, here's where you're going to plug your basis, I think.
So what he's talking about, actually, I'll just, before I get to that, I can say when we named our company Farpoint, it's an optical term, and it's actually the furthest distance you can hold an object from the naked eye and have it still be in focus. So, so it's the furthest distance you can hold an object and have it still be in focus to the naked eye, and that's a long-term perspective. We think that everybody's used to quarterly reports and quarterly reporting. Everybody's used to IRRs, right? And all those things really don't align the investor and the developer very well. I think that when the clock is our friend and the enemy of what's best for the deal, obviously we would like to look at multiple more than we would like to look at IRR. So that is how we've looked at the deal. So when the Opportunity Zone legislation came in, and actually Dave was studying the 2017 Jobs Act, Tax Cut and Jobs Act legislation when it came out, and he saw this little paragraph that said Opportunity Zone And isn't it amazing that a lot of people in the room here today, you're not that familiar with opportunity zone legislation. You're not that familiar with PACE financing. These are two hugely advantageous tools to investors and to developers, and they're so not well known, and it's amazing. So we're happy to be talking about that today. And then really, the whole idea of basics and what Dave was just referring to is, our mantra is always not so much location. It's always basis, because that is the reason things are never going to go perfectly. Time is always going to be a lot longer than you think it is. So as long as you are in the deal at the right basis, we think it'll work out well, and it always has.
Do you want to kick it to them? I don't know how much time we have left here.
We got 5 minutes. Again, if anybody has any questions. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
You're like talking my language, because I think there's a lot of people in the room thinking everything you're talking about is the future, but it's the present, and it's actually the past, right? So College Station is going to be deploying Amazon's drone deliveries this year. They're trying to get it in before the beginning of December. I mean, everything you're talking about is already happening. And I just want to mention that because, again, there's not many of us, perhaps any of us in this room under 20. And one of the reasons I haven't left one day a week during term time going up to the university and working with young students is that 52% of the world's population is under 30. And if you're not under 30 right now, you probably don't think like 52% of the world's population, in which all these things are really real. Like Star Trek was thinking up cell phones decades before they became an easy, commercial, portable reality. But everything you're speaking about is already here. We just tend to tune it out because it doesn't seem part of our realities. But it's going to happen with or without us. So I'd love to hear you all talk a little bit about how people can get on board with thinking like that. The future is really now. Not in 10 years, not in 2030, and certainly not in 2050. It's right here on our doorstep.
Yeah, all true. You want to kick this one off?
So, thank you for that. I mean, because we really want to boost Dave's ego. It's a little bit low.
It is. Friends like these.
One of the things, and Daniel's from Miami, and one of the things that's going on in Miami is to try to cultivate that the under 30 group in Miami is getting a lot of attention, and they're trying to do a lot to or have these programs to get them to stay there and to come there and to attract them there. So you're kind of and what our projects do, and we're talking about investment bank, but under 30, maybe people worry about that, maybe they don't. They just worry about access to the stuff that we're talking about. They worry about basically and doing it with sustainability. And that's kind of what the two of you, and maybe me to a smaller extent, have been trying to do.
Yeah, I can tell you that my dad had a plumbing company. I could have been the Goodman plumbing empire, but I let that go. But one of the biggest fights we ever had was in 1985 or something when I was trying to automate his office and put in desktop computers. And I said, Dad, you got to buy a fax machine. And he said, what's that? And I had to take him to a fax machine convention and show him what fax machines were. And he said, okay, but what are we going to do with it? And of course, we put it in the office and it never stopped running, right? So, SJ, to your point, the future is already here and we just need to embrace it.
Yeah, so the call to action there, I'd say if you're an investor, require this sort of stuff from your investments, right? Ask them for the and then of what it is. Don't fall into the trap of, wow, that was going to be a 1.4, but these gals over here are a 1.7. And look, that sure, if you really need that, then do that. But you have a unique opportunity to invest in what you'd like to see the future be. So ask the why on this stuff. Ask what meaningful challenge they're solving, because you're going to get to the root of, do they really have an orthodoxy and something that's going to guide true north when the shit hits the fan? Or are they in the wrong way me tooing an investment strategy. Because when the music stops, which we're real close to it, it's those ones that don't have a deep why and aren't solving for something that's going to have actual value to some customer that get obliterated by this stuff. So if you're an investor, say it with your chest, say it with your pocketbook. If you like to solve challenges and you're an operator, solve toward this stuff. What can you do in your business that leans into technology and or provides greater good upstream? Because that starts to create the benchmark. And if you can get there by being price competitive as part of what you're doing, you will always win out against your peers as part of that. And blockchain. Let's just throw that one in there, because if we get out of here without saying anything about blockchain, we've failed everybody. But start paying attention to blockchain, right? The internet, 1996, 1997, it was people were raising money through the internet to start literally, and you could Google this, literally hairdressers worth $800 million because they were invested on through the internet, right? Well, there were all sorts of businesses that were inflated going into 1999. SoftBank, everybody's heard of SoftBank. If you go to Wikipedia on Masa, it's really interesting. One of the first things you learn is he has lost more investor money than anybody else in the history of organized capital investment. And he did it in 1999 because he was so early and sprayed so much of his money because he bet on the fundamental technology of the internet. And we are seeing the same thing here today. Sure, there are 10,000 shitcoins out there. Doja this, Shibu that. And they're all just marketing spruce like the $800 million hairdresser or whatever the 55th company that was going to put recipes on the internet in 1998. Yeah, sure. But the fundamental technology of blockchain will have a bigger impact on how we not only operate commerce but operate society than the internet did. The immutable ledger and the ability to settle data nearly instantaneously and almost in an unlimited fashion is going to transform entire industries. One example is 2030, people will be saying, what is it, the Gen Zers or whatever that generation is going to say, what is a title company? Because they are gone. They are the first ones out the door. Insurance and viaticals and secondary markets for insurance, gone. This is going to be scary to a lot of people here, but the general brokerage community is going to take a beating because of blockchain. So start thinking about what you do and what you love, or maybe not what you do, what you love and a passion, and start to find what blockchain is doing in that space. I'm saying to you, if you need the money to eat or you need the money for a roof over your head, obviously don't do that because I can't give you timing on any of this. But take that 2 or 3 or 5% of your disposable income and start putting it into blockchain. Get yourself a Coinbase wallet, get yourself a second or third wallet so you can start to see what's happening, and then make the investment. And forget you're doing it. Do it twice a month or however income comes in for you, every check, 2 to 5%. Don't worry, it will pay off.
Well, last comment would be, imagine, so you're in a building, you're investing in a building that was built in 1985, and it's doing great. But next door there's a parking lot that's going to be turned into a building that's not going to be built until 5 years from now, 3 years from now, tomorrow. I guess what we're saying is that this is where Wayne Gretzky said, "I just the puck is going." This is where the puck is going. Gentlemen, my two good friends, thank you very much for participating.
Thanks, everybody.